With less than 2 months left in office, President Biden is trying to shape the outcome of Russia's war in Ukraine with a surprising policy change. This week, Ukraine fired longer-range U.S. missiles into Russia for the first time after Biden gave them the go-ahead. After holding out for months, the president reportedly changed his mind after the Kremlin brought North Korean troops into the fight.
It could, in essence, freeze the territories that the Ukrainians have and that the Russians have. And so this could pave the way for negotiations at the current level right now.
In response, Russian President Putin revised the country's nuclear code, lowering the threshold for using nukes. And in a clear escalation, Russia fired a ballistic missile with several warheads into eastern Ukraine. It's the first time a missile of that kind has been used in the war. Kristen, is President Biden's last-minute shift on Ukraine smart?
I mean, he's certainly saying let her rip here at the end. I think he assumes that Donald Trump will come in and be less favorable to the Ukrainian cause. And so he's saying, do whatever you've got to make as much progress as you can now before I'm gone. I do think that one of the criticisms of him was that they were asking Ukraine to be too restrained early on when maybe Ukraine had a chance of putting this to bed when Russia was a little bit on the ropes. So it seems to me that he's really just trying to get as much out of their system before Trump comes into office.
Biden was reportedly worried letting Ukraine use American weapons to strike inside Russia risked escalation, even some said World War III. But given Trump's lack of support for Ukraine, President Biden apparently wanted to leave Kyiv in the strongest position for a negotiated settlement. Lulu, even some of Biden's supporters say, yeah, the policy switch, we understand it, but it's way too little, way too late.
Yeah, it's an act of desperation on his way out. And I don't know that it's going to have the intended effect, as Kristen points out, of actually leaving Ukraine in a stronger position. Putin's strategy has always been one of a waiting game, of waiting out the American system of democracy to leech support for Ukraine or have a different administration come in. So, I mean, he only has a couple of months before I think things will be much more favorable to him.
But it seems like what Biden is saying is this is going to end up in a negotiated settlement, and I want Ukraine to be in the strongest position it can, for instance, to keep its territory inside Russia in Kursk, so they have something to give back and forth.
Raihan's shaking his head.
Well, look, you will
thank you for that.
You will recall, Chris, that on this program, I defended the Biden administration's previous position. They made a compelling case for a few different reasons. One, when you're looking at these ATACMS, in order to use them effectively, you would actually need U.S. aid in targeting the missiles. Otherwise, you're using, essentially a luxury automobile to do something that it's not really designed to do. So this is incredibly wasteful. We do not have many of these ATACMS. The Ukrainians do not have many of them. So this is a serious, serious strategic error in my judgment. Do I think that the Ukrainians, should we have unleashed them earlier on? Maybe we could debate that. But when Biden and Lloyd Austin made the case recently that we are not going to let them use ATACMS on Russian soil, I think that was very sensible. Now, this is very reckless, last-minute stuff that I don't think is actually going to be especially helpful to Ukraine.
Then there's Putin's response, lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. Here is the State Department's response.
I am unfortunately not surprised by the comments the Kremlin has made around the publication of this new revised nuclear doctrine. We will continue to call on Russia to stop bellicose and irresponsible rhetoric.
Nia, how seriously should the U.S. and the West take Putin's nuclear threat?
Listen, I think you have to take Putin, given his behavior so far vis-a-vis Ukraine, I think you have to take what he says seriously. This is obviously in response to what Ukraine has done, backed by the U.S., the weapons. And so in some ways, this was a bit of a blunder because it now has put Ukraine maybe in a more perilous position that's even going to be more perilous, right, once Donald Trump takes office. You saw him in that debate when asked about what does he want to see the outcome in terms of this war, and he just says he wants it to be over.
Right. He refused to say, I want Ukraine to win.
Exactly.
Raihan, Putin has rattled the nuclear saber before, but this was very chilling. This was an intermediate-range ballistic missile with multiple warheads that was fully, they were conventional, but they were fully capable of being nuclear warheads instead of conventional warheads. How much should we make of this talk about a nuclear threat?
We should be very disturbed by it. And this was the background behind why the Biden administration earlier on was saying, let's be restrained in the use of these weapons on Russian soil. This is deadly serious. I think you hear a lot of people, a lot of smart, thoughtful people I agree with on a lot of things, who've said, Russia's a paper tiger, don't take it seriously. My view is that this is a very combustible global situation, number one. Number two, one thing that really concerns me is that I think that part of the background here, why did the Biden administration not do this before, is because they were concerned about what happens to global markets, including global oil markets. And it almost seems as though, hey, we're not going to worry about that now. We're going to let Putin engage in this incredible escalatory rhetoric and really rattle global markets now that he's out the door. That, to me, does not seem very presidential and very statesmanlike.
And then Donald Trump takes office in January, and he talked during the campaign he could end this war in 24 hours. I'm not going to ask you about the 24-hour part of it, Kristen, but how does this end?
I think this ends with Donald Trump putting pressure on our allies in Ukraine to accept a deal that involves them ceding some territory. I think that's the way this is going to go. I think that he's going to say the American people do not have as much appetite for continuing to send you assistance, and so take a good deal. Don't make this stretch out and wind up with a worse deal.
Of course, the question is, what's a good deal, Nia? And you know, one of the concerns, and it seems at this point, given the balance of power, is that a deal that would have to be made, particularly if Trump is basically pulling the rug out from under Zelensky and the Ukrainians, is that Russia gets to keep some of the territory that it has gained during this almost 3-year war.
That's right. You embolden Russia. They essentially win. You know, they invaded a sovereign country, and if they come away with parts of that country, what more might they do going forward? Particularly with a weakened West, particularly with a Donald Trump who's essentially saying we're not going to come to the defense of a country like Ukraine.
So if that were to happen, Lulu, that the war is negotiated, we only got a couple of seconds here, Russia gets to keep some of its gains. What's the message to Putin?
Message to Putin, that's always been the fear. The message to Putin is, hey, we can't, we're not going to protect you. Take what you want. It's all yours. And I think it leaves Russia in a much stronger position.